All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. And Ryan Mauro is back on the Adult in the Room podcast. And how are you? Thanks so much for coming on.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming on. This study was it's exactly what I needed to see. It just sadly confirmed a lot of my suppositions. And now you've actually, I think, confirmed everything, confirmed my worst suspicions. Tell me a little bit about Infiltrated, the ideological capture of homeless advocacy, and what you're doing about it.
Yeah, so this was interesting. So this is the second report of mine that has gotten to the desk of the President of the United States in less than a month. And the first one being about George Soros,
yes,
and the money that's going from Open Society foundations to pro-terrorist groups and literal domestic terrorist groups. And then that dovetailed with this project, which is with the cooperation of the Discovery Institute, who are experts in the issue of solving homelessness. And that's a new issue for me. So I learned a lot through them. They taught me about the issue and like some areas to look. And so I just started mapping out the major groups involved in what's called the housing justice movement.
Yes.
That basically stands for free housing. And as you can imagine, that attracts a lot of anarchists, anarcho-communists, Marxists, Hamas fans.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of radicals get attracted to that idea, even though there's plenty of good people out there that have arguments, whether you agree with them or not, that say that's a worthy cause of free housing for everybody. But that does overlap with some very bad extremist groups that are out there. And so I helped map out the extremist networks. So that part of the report, that's what I was responsible for. And really, I was amazed. Like there's this one group, ATUN, Autonomous Tenants Union Network, that I came across, and it's pretty explicitly an anarchist group. But they identify themselves as tenants unions. But they make it clear on their website. They say, by tenants, we mean everybody. Like it's Marxist anarcho-communist revolution. And they basically say by tenants that just applies to everybody. So it's revolution for everybody.
One of you guys took a look at the amici briefs in the Grants Pass Supreme Court decision about homelessness. And it was just a stark reminder that there are a lot of groups out there who are all about helping homeless people, but there are a lot of NGOs and stuff like that you guys had mentioned in the study that had been fighting for or against rather the city of Grants Pass. And what the Grants Pass wanted to do was to be able to say no camping. And the Ninth Circuit, of course, because it's such an idiotic court, said, "Oh no, that is one of those it's against the Eighth Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment, of which there's been no punishment, but nevertheless they'd said it was, and so bad, that's bad." And so the city of Grants Pass prevailed in this particular thing, and all of a sudden you were able to say you can't be on the streets. And then all of a sudden, that of course has brought up all different kinds of advocacy from people that you're watching. And Ryan, are they the same people that we see funding Antifa, that are funding the homeless organizations?
There is overlap. It's more about creating the ecosystem. So a lot of these so-called independent militants will emphasize, we don't have nonprofit entities, but the ecosystem with which they thrive, especially on social media, how the cause gets promoted and it attracts people, that does come from nonprofits. And then you have individuals that are in that radical pool that then act on their own accord, And it doesn't mean that they're disconnected from the ecosystem, obviously. And so you have these nonprofit organizations that we list there. And so you'll have the normal housing justice groups, some of which get a lot of government funding on the federal and state levels. And the one criticism of them is that there's no accountability. So it's just free housing for everybody, but then you'll have drug addicts in there, people with mental health issues, and their situation actually gets worse because they get kicked out. It becomes a drug den. The model that Discovery Institute promotes, they say no accountability. There has to be accountability first, and if you want charities to supply housing as part of that, then you can have that discussion. But you've got to treat the mental health. You've got to get them off drugs, like of course. And so you have those types of groups that just push this general narrative that there is no misbehavior here. That whatever mental health issues they have, whatever drug addiction issues they have, that's because they are economically oppressed. And therefore the police are oppressors. If they sweep an area and make them all move, they don't make them just stand up forever and say, oh, you can't camp and lay down somewhere. There's areas you can't do it because it's interfering with traffic and where people are. And so this kind of merged a bit with the anti-police movement. I see that they all kind of like intersected. And so you'll have groups that just think in order for someone to heal from mental illness or drug addiction, they have to have the stability of a home. And so they just go that far with it. And so they kind of naively get involved in all this. Then you have the others that are more quite clearly anti-American, oftentimes pro-Hamas. And then you have just the blatant anarchists.
So it all redounds to capitalism, right? Capitalism bad, having to work for your money, that's bad. I mean, I heard that, this housing justice and people don't have houses because they don't have money, and it really is basically that. Or is it just to result in chaos? Is there an objective?
It kind of comes together. So there will be people who, yes, they're just indicting capitalism and all flows from that. There is no they're all victims, and you're a bad person if you say personal responsibility is a thing. So they want like a revolution. But they're focused on, okay, let's just get the homeless people home. Then you have the other people who, tenants unions, like I was saying, will engage in all sorts of activism, and it's kind of like that's just their name. So yeah, they care about the housing justice issue, but they'll get involved in all sorts of anti-police causes, pro-Hamas causes, and those are the more explicitly seditionist ones. But in fairness, there are other pro-homeless advocacy groups that call for subsidized housing or even free housing that aren't part of this. So yeah, housing justice is kind of like the terminology that is favored among the more revolutionary elements. But you'll come across groups that say housing justice without realizing that's where it's coming from. And they don't want any part of that. They just feel people deserve a place to stay. And that's the extent of the thought process.
And usually it has to do with drug addiction, and the places that in state of California where I've done, quite a bit of helpful stuff with the homeless. I noticed that we worked for the transitional housing place and just, cooked and stuff like that. Just, and, but what I noticed was there were all kinds of people. They went to group, and we actually got a Bible study in there, and that was able to be used as one of their groups, which was a requirement of them. They were supposed to be sober in this house, and all kinds of things that they were required to do. Look for a job. They had a job board, and they had people helping them. Okay, 2016 happens, and after that, within a couple of years, it was entirely different. No longer did they have to be sober. No longer did they have to look for a job. No longer did they have to go to a group. They didn't want to put any onerous burdens on anybody to help themselves. And you saw an explosion in homelessness. And sure enough, California, Oregon, and Washington, worse than the homeless problem. Worst.
Yeah, it's Discovery Institute. Their data shows that it's a real crisis. Like, it's far worse than anyone realizes. And I've got to tell you, I know multiple people who I spent a lot of money on to help that ended up homeless, and they're not drug addicted. They're not crazy. Like, it happens a lot to people you wouldn't think, just because a bunch of things go wrong and there not a safety net. So emotionally, I gravitate towards this cause. If I have a bias, it's in that direction. But it's clear to see when you have groups that care about the homeless saying things like, oh, well, there's homeless people in Gaza, as if they don't exist in Israel. Therefore, we have a duty to get involved in the Palestinian issue. And so we support Hamas and we stand their right to resist. You know, they find that angle, and you're like, you know what? Maybe this wasn't really about homelessness for you. Because you just pivoted just like that, and you don't know anything about it. So when someone does that, when they very arrogantly think they have the answer to all these issues, usually, I mean, they could just be jerks, but usually it's because they have an ideology that they think answers all of those questions. So it actually is a sign of radicalism.
You talk about in the study that these folks in the housing justice thing, they use the words and terms and outcomes of the radical revolutionaries, as you pointed out. And some of the things that you found were that there's plenty of resources out there. I mean, I could always find you can always find food, always, for homeless people. There's never a dearth of food. There's always available, but they're still out there taking their drugs. But we've talked endlessly about this on this program. But what do you say about the things that are available to homeless people, and why are they still on the streets, Ryan Mauro?
I will tell you the situations that I'm thinking of. The one guy, he found a homeless shelter, but it was dangerous. There was violent, it wasn't good. And then this other woman who went with a teenage daughter who I know, I spent hours. We couldn't find a place. So there are places where they have spare beds, and like I've heard about that in Seattle with Jonathan Cho and other people. But I know of cases where that wasn't the case. So there should be some empathy, but then in other cases, they do have spare beds that aren't being used. So it's complex that way. And to a point that you made earlier, I was talking to Bruce Chapman, who's one of the founders of Discovery Institute, and he taught me a lot about this. And he's explaining to me how, especially in Seattle, the groups that are the most successful, and I've heard this before, are those that have that personal touch, a Bible study, a spiritual element, and it's not because of religious indoctrination, although, I mean, certainly the faith and the power of that helps a lot of people, but it's that you're spending time getting to know them, and they'll feel that you genuinely love them and have no reason to help them other than you love them. And that sets them on a new course. So it's not even, you're talking about religion, but in some cases it's that, but in the other cases it's just that human relationship. And so these and that will involve personal responsibility, right? Because if you love someone, you're going to say, look, here's the cause, here's the effect. You're not just going to say, oh, do whatever you want because I hope you like me. That doesn't mean you care about somebody. That means you care about yourself. And so the programs that seem to be the most successful are the ones that have personal responsibility combined with human connection.
What's the old saying?
They talk about politics the whole time.
Right. Exactly. What is it? The old saying is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really pretty much it, right? Kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that opens up the door to change, and it gives people hope. And there's just something I mean, as a Christian, for me, I think it's more than that. But in the cases where it doesn't come to that level, just having that human relationship there and having a mentorship involved makes all the difference. And if you have that, you've got to help them get someone that can guide them and say, look, we're going to help you, but it doesn't make sense unless you get off the drugs, but we'll help you do it, but you got to get off the drugs.
Yeah, a Union Gospel Mission in Portland does the best job of getting people off the streets. And they preach the gospel, and people just acknowledge a higher power. They don't have to, subscribe to anything in particular. But what they do is they know that they are not alone, and that they have somebody to walk by them to get them out and gainfully employed and all that stuff. But that is the best program in Portland, and the religious programs are always the best programs. But they're not the ones that are necessarily looking for that dough, the NGO money that you saw in all those amicus briefs.
So much money. It's a business. It's a huge
business.
Taxpayer-funded business model.
Yeah.
And so what might happen as a result of this report, because Jonathan Cho gave it to the president on live TV, basically, and then he met with all the senior officials afterwards, is you might see some sort of actions to cut off that taxpayer money on the state level, on the federal level, and then there's programs where they team up, and it may not be a financial transaction. But the impression I get is that there's real momentum now on this issue, and there's not just the extremism element, just like the issue of homelessness, which should be one of the top issues, doesn't really come up, much less the issue of extremists exploiting it.
Here's where your nexus is in your report. Stop the sweeps. Here's one of them. Stop the sweeps PDX. Stop the sweeps in Seattle. And that's fundamentally an effort by Antifa-like individuals to get in the way of getting rid of the homeless camps, because it redounds to their favor.
And they'll compare that to the college campus. Gaza, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas camps, because they view it essentially as like a base. I mean, they view everything in insurgent terms, seditionist terms. So when we talk about homelessness encampment, they're saying it the same word, but they're thinking that's our territory, that's a base. And you'll see that in the language. And there's a really cool part of the report where I quote extensively from an account from Stop the Sweeps in Texas, I believe it is, where they talk about how they manipulated the system, how they joined the nonprofit organizations that are getting taxpayer money and have the coalitions and kind of set the template. And then during the breakout sessions, they would radicalize people and then bring them out and then form their own little militant group, not in opposition to them, but I mean, they have difference of opinion, but they would exploit them, and they would get intel from people within the more mainstream pro-homeless people organizations, get the intel that they need. So they got the political access through the commonly accepted mainstream groups, but then we're doing militant things on the streets, fighting police and illegal things like that. And so they really outlined how the whole system works, involving groups that are technically separate, but they still fuel each other.
Wow. Technically separate, but that, they're allies, right? Isn't that what they call themselves? Allies? Allied groups?
They'll have heated debates, especially because like the Antifa type anarchists really hate the nonprofit industry. So they'll be kind of like you capitalist pig mentality to some of them. Some of them don't have that, but even the ones that do have that attitude will be like, but there's still some use for you. So there's an alliance, but I think you're kind of dirty because you're a capitalist.
Oh, I can remember being out in downtown Portland. I was doing the Mike Strickland story for this podcast. Did a series of serials of his getting beaten up by Antifa and then having to pull his gun to keep them from hurting him again. And he was put in jail, of course, naturally. And so, but I can remember, to your point, being outside the federal courthouse and the people who were in federal court because of the big clash between Oregon State troopers and the family of people who wanted to use Western farmlands or rangelands to feed their cattle, and the feds told them they couldn't do it anymore, and then somebody got murdered, and this was a federal case in Portland, and I'm outside the courthouse, and here's all these people who look like they just came out of, the Wild West, aligning themselves with people I was interviewing about the Mike Strickland case, and it was just wild. It was just Antifa people and these people, because they came together, because that's what happens, because they have a genuine mistrust of what the government did in that particular case. And they joined together, and I have pictures of them holding hands and holding up signs. And, that's, so you can make sort of a side note, but it's an important one.
Interesting though, is you can see almost, particularly when it comes to the actual homeless people, the level of manipulation and exploitation by the extremists. You can kind of see it visually, because usually you talk about this issue, people think you're recruiting and radicalizing the homeless. I mean, maybe they're talking to him about some of that stuff, but that's like not really where their mind is at. If you're homeless, you're thinking about other things. So the people attacking the cops, visually, I mean, they are dressed semi-normal. I mean, a lot of Antifa people just look weird, but they're more in the normal category than the homeless people. So it's not like they're radicalizing the homeless people and they're saying they're attacking the cops because now they see themselves as jihadists or Marxist insurgents. It's just the militants operate through them. And then they're there kind of like they're either getting arrested or they're leaving, and then you have these other guys showing up and being like, all right, good, I'm gonna go F the police, you know?
Right. So you also did, because this is just sort of dovetails into your work with the Antifa funding from the big billionaires, and we'll get to that in a second because I want to get you to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things more in your report on the extremist capture of the homeless industrial complex. Housing justice as an ideological gateway, the intersectionality aspect of it, the shift from charitable work to advocacy work, making radicals out of the people they're supposed to be helping, legal protections and tax advantages and what the true intent is, the exploitation of extremist groups. And to let you know, I'm sure since you are talking with the Discovery Institute in Seattle, I fill in on the radio there, so which is where you were last time, and so that's why I'm more familiar. And plus, I went to the U and such. But in Seattle's the only place, and maybe one other, that is considering providing homeless addicts with places with a safe supply of drugs. A safe supply of drugs. San Francisco talked about it, never did it. And so Seattle is actually talking about doing it, providing addicts with drugs. That is insane.
Harm reduction, they call it.
Yeah, well, this is beyond that. This is safe supply. They don't do that. They give them all the paraphernalia with harm reduction, which is bogus.
You're talking about actual drugs.
I'm talking about actual drugs. They're talking about doing that.
The needles. Wow.
Yeah. No, this is drugs. Besides the needles, besides the pipe, besides the foil, besides the place, besides the additional help to provide a safe place to do it, they want to provide the drugs.
That's insane because
it's other level.
I mean, you can see for like 30 seconds, right? You can see the logic of someone being like, oh, well, give them a safe place to do it. And then hopefully, that leads to a better outcome. But here's the thing. When people engage in destructive behaviors, it's one thing when they do it alone or with a couple of their friends. If you have a central location where they're all going together, there's an exponential effect on everybody, especially the people that are living there. So it does make it end up worse because you're creating a social circle based around the destructive activity that you're hoping to make less destructive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's insane. So in your work with chasing down where the Soros money was going and the violent extremists that it goes to, in some cases, and the work of Seamus Bruner, who was on the program before also, and tell me a little bit about where that money is coming to fund places and things like Antifa and militancy and on the streets of the country.
So it won't be a direct check to a group like Antifa because there's that split. Right. You'll have like you have groups that pretend to be mainstream but are actually pretty radical. And so you have people like George Soros that are comfortable giving money to them. But then you have, the so-called like true Antifa that wants to show how pure they are, and they'll never have their own nonprofit, but they benefit from the ecosystem. The fact that social media is putting out the propaganda, there's people meeting in the comments section, and they'll say this, they benefit downstream. Sure. But then for things like throwing bricks and breaking laws, they'll fundraise, between their friends or themselves and, through like Cash App and things like that. You don't need much money for that. What's expensive is the ecosystem of hate. And so that's what I found with Soros's Open Society Foundations, because what happened was my bias was actually because I monitor, I hate these terms far left, far right, but like white supremacist, anti-Semitic elements for many years. And the Soros problem is exaggerated. It is used in anti-Semitic propaganda. And I had seen that so many times that I figured when I wrote my initial report, Marching Towards Violence, and I was laying out all the pro-terrorist groups, organizing the anti-Israel protests, I figured, all right, I'm going to look at the Soros thing, but I'm not going to dig up anything new because everybody talks about it all the time. And most of the time it's exaggerated or false. So like my bias was not like, oh, I need to go find Soros. I thought I wasn't going to find anything. But then I go to his website, the Open Society Foundation's website, where they list their own grants, and they say they only post the ones that they're comfortable posting. If they think posting them will endanger the grantee or themselves, they don't post it. So I was just looking at the ones that they felt comfortable telling the world about. And I kept seeing these groups that I had mapped out showing up over and over again. And I was like, all right, so there's a kernel of truth to this, but amazingly, this is a big knowledge gap. Because it turned out that people had written about different grants from Soros going to radical groups here and there in drips and drabs. It turned out nobody had gone through all of it cumulatively and put it together, got a dollar figure, and named them all. And that blew my mind. I was like, all right, well, that sounds like a interesting project. And so I did that. And I came up with the total of the ones I was able to identify. And I couldn't look at every single grant. Was over $80 million since 2016. Going to 54 groups that are inarguably pro-terrorism, including some that are domestic terrorists that fit the FBI's definition on U.S. soil, doing things like illegal harassment, economic sabotage, where like you block a port, property destruction, rioting, like all of that actually is terrorism.
Wow. Well, keep doing what you're doing, Ryan Mauro. We really appreciate your efforts, appreciate your willingness to come on and talk about it. People will be interested in what you have to say. Don't you worry about a thing. And I was so pleased to see Jonathan mention the work that you've done and the your organization, Capital Research Center, as well as the Discovery Institute, about how the homeless industrial complex has become extremist in so many ways. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Well, there you go.